The first words my mother-in-law ever spoke to me weren't welcome, they were a judgment. She stood in the marble foyer of a house that felt more like a museum than a home, her posture as rigid as the statues in the garden. Her eyes, the color of winter frost, scanned me from my worn but respectable shoes to the nervous smile I had practiced in the car. Then, a single, perfectly manicured nail tapped against her pearl necklace. "So," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum that did nothing to soften the blow. "You're the one Marco has chosen to entertain." That was the moment my life split into two distinct paths, the one I was expected to walk, and the one I would be forced to build for myself in the shadows. This is the story of how the woman who tried to make me invisible ended up being the very person who made my success inevitable. It's a story about the quiet, calculated patience of revenge. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small, then you know the fire that I'm talking about. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how I turned that fire into an inferno. And while you're here, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe, because the best revenge is a story well told that I still remember the scent of that house on the first day. It was a suffocating mix of lemon polish, old money, and lilies. So many lilies, their funereal sweetness clinging to the air like a warning. My own small apartment had always smelled of coffee and old books. This place smelled of silence. My husband, Marco, squeezed my hand. "Don't be nervous," he whispered, though his own palm was slick with sweat. "Mother just takes a while to warm up to people." But Eleonora De Luca didn't warm up. She operated at a perpetual freezing point. That first meeting set the tone for the next 5 years of my life. I was Bella, the scholarship girl who had somehow managed to ensnare the De Luca heir. I had met Marco in a university library. He was charming, funny, and seemed utterly oblivious to the chasm between our worlds. He saw me, my ambition, my love for literature, the way my eyes lit up when I talked about economic theory. He didn't see a girl from the wrong side of the tracks, he saw a partner. His mother, however, saw only a blemish on the pristine tapestry of their lineage. The wedding was a production orchestrated entirely by Eleonora. My own mother, a kind woman who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, was treated with a polite condescension that was more insulting than outright cruelty. Eleonora would compliment my mother's dress with a phrase like, "It's amazing what one can find with a little creativity," her eyes lingering on the simple fabric for a moment too long. Every detail of the wedding, from the guest list to the flavor of the cake, was designed to remind me of my place. I was not a bride joining a family, I was an acquisition being assimilated. Life in the De Luca mansion was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Eleonora never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her power lay in the subtleties. It was in the way she'd rearrange the fork I'd placed on the table, a silent correction in front of guests. It was in her habit of telling stories about Marco's ex-girlfriends, all of whom came from good stock and had impeccable taste. It was in the gifts she'd give me for my birthday, a subscription to a magazine on proper etiquette, a gift certificate for a diction coach, a cookbook titled Simple Meals for a Simple Palate. Each one was a perfectly wrapped insult, a reminder that I was a project to be fixed, not a daughter to be loved. "I need to breathe," I'd tell myself, standing in the vast, empty guest room that had become my sanctuary. The master bedroom, which I shared with Marco, felt like occupied territory. But the guest room had a large window overlooking the gardens, and I would stand there for hours, tracing the patterns of the stone pathways, imagining they led somewhere far away. My internal monologue became a constant stream of self-correction. "Don't slouch, Bella. Enunciate your words. Remember which spoon is for the consommé. Smile, even when the bile is rising in your throat." I was shrinking, contorting myself into a shape that might be acceptable. Marco, bless his heart, was caught in the middle. He loved me, I truly believed that. In the quiet moments, late at night when the weight of his mother's presence had receded, he would hold me and apologize. "She's just from a different generation," he'd murmur into my hair. "She doesn't mean it the way it sounds." But she did. She meant every single syllable. First year was about survival. The second was about quiet observation. I started to see the cracks in the DeLuca facade. Eleonora wasn't just a snob, she was deeply insecure. Her entire identity was wrapped up in the family name, in the illusion of effortless perfection. She managed the family's charities, hosting galas and fundraisers where she would glide through the room, accepting accolades for her generosity. But I saw the truth. I saw the frantic, last-minute phone calls, the way she would bully volunteers, the sheer panic in her eyes if a floral arrangement was slightly off-center. Her life was a performance, and she was terrified of a single bad review. My job, as she once put it, was to be a silent, smiling accessory. I was to chair the most boring committees, stuff envelopes for her pet projects, and nod in agreement at dinner parties when her guests lamented the state of the modern world. One evening, about 2 years into my marriage, we were hosting one of these dinners. Table glittered with crystal and silver that cost more than my entire university education. Topic turned to business, and one of the guests, a portly man named Mr. Abernathy, was complaining about supply chain logistics. "It's a nightmare," he grumbled. "We can't get our components from Asia to our factories in Europe without a dozen middlemen and a mountain of paperwork. Efficiency is a pipe dream." I saw it then, a flicker of an idea. At university, my final thesis had been on optimizing international logistics using predictive analytics. I had a theoretical model that could solve the exact problem he was describing. Before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "Have you considered a decentralized hub model?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the cavernous dining room. "If you consolidate your shipments at a strategic port and use a dynamic routing algorithm, you could cut down on both customs delays and shipping costs." Table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Mr. Abernathy looked intrigued. Marco looked proud. But Eleonora's eyes were like chips of ice. She let out a small, tinkling laugh, the sound of a chandelier shattering. "Oh, my dear Bella," she said, placing her hand over mine. Her touch was cold. "Let's leave the business talk to the men, shall we? You're far too pretty to trouble your head with such dreary things." Table chuckled politely. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat and changed the subject. Marco's proud smile evaporated, replaced by a familiar, helpless apology in his eyes. I felt a heat rise in my cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with rage. It was a cold, clean fury. In that moment, she hadn't just dismissed me. She had dismissed the one part of myself I still recognized, my mind. The part of me that existed before I became Mrs. DeLuca. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to Marco's steady breathing, and the seed of an idea began to sprout in the barren soil of my life. She wanted me to be a pretty, empty-headed doll. She wanted me to be powerless. She thought my mind was a pretty little head incapable of dreary things. Fine. I would build an empire out of dreary things. I would build it in secret, in the hours she spent at her luncheons and fittings. I would build it with the small inheritance my grandmother had left me, the pin money, as Eleonora had once called it. I would use the very intelligence she belittled as my primary weapon. The humiliation at the dinner table was not just an insult, it was the ignition. Eleonora had spent 2 years trying to bury me under the weight of her expectations, to smother the person I used to be. But she had made a critical mistake. She thought she was burying a seed, but she had no idea she was planting a tree. And as I lay there in the darkness, I made a silent, solemn vow. One day, that tree would grow so tall it would block out her sun. One day, she would find herself living in my shadow. The game had been hers for 2 long years, but as the first rays of dawn crept through the window, I knew with absolute certainty that the rules were about to change. Question was no longer if I could survive her world, but if she could survive the one I was about to create. The beginning of my rebellion wasn't a bang, it was a whisper. It was the quiet click of a laptop opening in the dead of night. It was the soft scratch of a pen on a legal pad in the forgotten study at the back of the East Wing. My life became a study in compartmentalization. By day, I was Bella DeLuca, the dutiful, demure wife. I planned menus, I attended charity teas, I smiled vacantly as Eleonora held court. My face became a mask, my smile a shield. But when the house fell silent, the real me would emerge. I was Bella Rivera again. I started with my thesis. I pulled it from an old USB drive, the words on the screen feeling like a message from a past self, a ghost of the woman I used to be. I spent weeks refining the model, updating it with current market data, turning academic theory into a practical business plan. Called it Aura Innovations. The name felt right. It was about creating a new atmosphere, an invisible field of influence. It was exactly what I was doing. My grandmother's inheritance was just enough to register the company and hire a freelance coder in another country. I communicated with him exclusively through encrypted emails. Every transaction, every invoice was a carefully covered track. I used a P.O. box in a town an hour away, which I'd visit under the guise of sourcing unique antiques for the house, an activity Eleonora approved of as a suitable hobby for a woman of my station. First 6 months were brutal. I was running on 4 hours of sleep a night. My body ached with a constant humming exhaustion. There were moments of crippling doubt, where I'd stare at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop and see a fraud. Who was I, a literature major with no real-world experience, to think I could build a global logistics company from a guest room? Eleonora's voice was a permanent resident in my head, a venomous whisper. "You're not smart enough. You're not one of us. Poor girls should never dream." During this time, Eleonora's campaign of subtle erosion escalated. It was as if she could sense some new internal strength in me, and it unnerved her. She needed to reassert her dominance. One afternoon, she called me into her personal sitting room. The room was drenched in cream and gold, a monument to her own self-importance. She was holding a small, beautifully wrapped box. "A little something for you, dear," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. I opened it. Inside was a single, exquisite but incredibly delicate porcelain teacup. It was so thin the light shone through it. "It's from the Beaumont collection," she explained. "It has been in the De Luca family for over 200 years. I want you to have it, as a symbol of your place in this family now." My heart, for a foolish moment, swelled. Was this an olive branch? An acceptance? "Eleonora, I thank you. It's beautiful." "Yes, it is," she said, her gaze sharp. "It is also irreplaceable. Try not to break it." The message was clear. I was being entrusted with something precious and fragile, and I was expected to fail. For the next few weeks, that teacup became a symbol of my precarious position. She would insist I use it whenever we had tea. My hands would tremble as I lifted it, my every muscle tensed, terrified of the crack that would prove her right. I felt like a child being tested, and I hated myself for caring so much. Meanwhile, Aura Innovations was slowly taking shape. My coder developed a beta version of the software. I needed a client, a test case. I went back to Mr. Abernathy, the man from the dinner party. I didn't approach him as Bella DeLuca. Created a new email identity, a professional alias, B. Rivera, a logistics consultant. I sent him a cold email, a concise 2-paragraph pitch outlining exactly how I could solve his supply chain problem, complete with projected savings. I didn't expect a reply. Men like him were inundated with proposals. But he replied within the hour. He was intrigued. We scheduled a call. I bought a burner phone and took the call in my car, parked in the grocery store parking lot, my heart hammering against my ribs. I lowered my voice, speaking with a confidence I didn't feel, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I walked him through the data, the algorithms, the implementation plan. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Who did you say you work for, Ms. Rivera?" he asked. "Right now," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor inside me. "I work for myself." He hired me for a small 3-month pilot program. Contract was worth a pittance to his company, but to me it was the world. It was proof. It was real. The success of that pilot program was my first taste of real power. My software worked. Didn't just work, it exceeded his projections. Cut his shipping times by 18% and his costs by 12%. It was the first real money I had ever earned, money that was mine, untainted by the DeLuca name. I opened a separate bank account, one Marco and his family knew nothing about. Seeing that first deposit land was more satisfying than any piece of jewelry Marco had ever given me. But as my secret life flourished, my home life withered. The strain of living a double life was immense. Marco noticed the change in me. I was more distant, more tired. "Is everything all right, Bella?" he'd ask, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You seem so far away lately." "Just tired," I'd lie, the guilt a bitter pill. Planning the new wing for the Children's Hospital charity is taking a lot out of me. I was using the very duties Eleonora assigned me as a cover. The irony was not lost on me. Teacup finally broke. It wasn't my fault. A maid, rushing to clear the table, knocked it over. But in Eleonora's eyes, the verdict was already written. She didn't say a word. She just looked at the shattered pieces on the floor, then looked at me, a flicker of triumphant disappointment in her eyes. The look said it all. I knew it. "You are careless. You are not one of us. You will always break what is beautiful." That night, Marco tried to defend me. "Mother, it was an accident. Bella didn't even touch it." "It doesn't matter, Marco," she replied, her voice calm and chilling. "Some things are simply not meant for some people." The incident hardened something inside me. The guilt I felt toward Marco began to curdle into resentment. Why did he always apologize for her, instead of demanding that she apologize to me? His weakness, which I had once seen as a gentle nature, now looked like complicity. Turning point came on our 3rd anniversary. I had spent weeks working with a local artisan to create a custom-made leather-bound journal for Marco, filled with reprints of first-edition poems from his favorite authors. It was an intensely personal gift, something that spoke to the man I had first fallen in love with in that university library. That evening, we had a small family dinner. Marco opened his gift from me and his face lit up. "Bella, this is incredible." "Thank you." Then it was Eleonora's turn. "We have a little something for you both," she announced, a smug smile playing on her lips. A butler emerged, carrying a velvet box. Inside were 2 keys. "They're for the new summer home in Capri," she said. "We've just closed. Of course, it's in the family trust, but you two will have primary use of it." Marco was ecstatic. My gift, my thoughtful, personal, heartfelt gift, was instantly forgotten, overshadowed by a multi-million-dollar display of DeLuca power. Later that evening, I found Marco in his study on the phone with his mother. I stood in the doorway, unseen. "Yes, Mother, it's the perfect gift," he was saying. No, Bella's gift was lovely, very thoughtful. But this is a real legacy." "Thank you. Very thoughtful." The same tone one might use to describe a child's crayon drawing. My heart didn't just break, it turned to stone. He saw my effort, my love, as a quaint little gesture. But her money? That was legacy. I backed away from the door, silent. I went to the guest room, my office, my command center, and I looked at the Aura Innovations business plan. Mr. Abernathy had just signed a full 1-year contract. I was already in talks with 2 other potential clients. Marco had made his choice. He had chosen the legacy he was born into over the life we were supposed to build together. He saw me as an accessory to his life, just as his mother did. He had chosen his mother's world of cold, hard cash over my world of quiet, heartfelt effort. He thought my gift was thoughtful. He had no idea what I was truly capable of thinking. He had no idea of the scale of my ambition. He had no idea that while he was accepting the keys to a cage in Capri, I was busy forging the keys to a kingdom. And as I looked out the window into the dark, manicured gardens, a new, chilling thought entered my mind. My initial plan was just to build a business to create financial freedom for myself. But now that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to just escape. I had to win. The conversation I overheard was not an ending, it was a release. The love I had clung to, the hope that Marco would one day choose me, evaporated. And in its place grew a cold, clear focus. I was no longer a wife trying to build a secret business. I was a CEO who happened to be married. I moved my operations out of the house. It was too risky. Using the profits from the Abernathy contract, I rented a small, nondescript office space in a business park across town. A place where no one from Eleanora's world would ever dream of setting foot. I hired my first employee, a sharp young data analyst named Sarah who asked no questions about my unusual working hours. To her, I was simply Ms. Rivera, the demanding but brilliant founder of a promising tech startup. My days became a meticulously choreographed dance of deception. In the mornings, I would leave the DeLuca mansion dressed for a yoga class or a charity meeting. I'd drive to a nearby cafe, change in the restroom into a sharp business suit, and then head to my real life, my real work. I would spend 8 hours running my company, taking investor calls, managing logistics for our growing client base, and refining our proprietary software. Then, in the late afternoon, I'd reverse the process, changing back into my Bella DeLuca costume and arriving home with a vague story about traffic after a productive afternoon spent selecting auction items for the hospital gala. The distance between Marco and me grew into a silent, unbridgeable chasm. We slept in the same bed but lived in different universes. He was absorbed in the family's investment firm and I was absorbed in my work. The less I tried to please him and his mother, the less they seemed to notice me. My quiet compliance had been replaced by a polite, impenetrable wall. They mistook my emotional absence for acceptance of my role. It was the perfect cover. Aura Innovations began to grow, slowly at first and then with startling speed. We landed a second major client, then a third. Our reputation in the niche world of international logistics was spreading. We were the silent fixers, the company that could make impossible timelines possible. I secured our first round of seed funding from a venture capital firm in another state. I conducted the entire negotiation via video conference from my bare-bones office, with a blank white wall behind me. They didn't know if I was in a palace or a basement. All they knew was that my numbers were flawless and my vision was undeniable. I learned to speak the language of power, of capital, of leverage. I was no longer the timid girl who stammered at a dinner party. I was a woman who could command a boardroom, who could dissect a term sheet, and who could stare down an investor twice my age without blinking. About 4 years into my marriage, Eleanor announced she would be planning a monumental party for her 60th birthday the following year. It was to be the social event of the decade. A celebration of the DeLuca legacy, she declared at dinner, her eyes gleaming. We'll have everyone there. The governor, the board members from the museum, the Vanderbilts, it will be a night to remember. As she spoke, detailing her plans for ice sculptures and a string quartet flown in from Vienna, the final piece of my own plan clicked into place. All this time I had been building my arsenal, sharpening my sword, but I hadn't decided on the battlefield. Eleonora, in her magnificent arrogance, had just handed it to me. Her grandest stage. Her biggest audience. The celebration of her legacy. It was perfect. From that moment on, my work took on a new, feverish intensity. I wasn't just building a company anymore. I was building a crescendo. Everything had to be timed to peak on the night of that party. There were close calls. One afternoon, Marco came home early while I was on a frantic call with a port authority in Singapore trying to resolve a customs issue for a client. I was in the guest room, my old office, and had to dive under the desk, muffling the phone against my chest, my heart pounding as he called my name through the house. I heard his footsteps approach the door, then recede as the housekeeper told him I was out. I stayed under that desk for 10 minutes after he left, my body trembling with adrenaline. Another time, a small society blog published a photo of me leaving my office building. The caption was innocent. Bella DeLuca, wife of Marco DeLuca, spotted running errands in the city's business district. My blood ran cold. I waited for the call from Eleonora for the interrogation. But it never came. The idea that I could be doing anything other than shopping or visiting a spa was so alien to her that she likely saw the photo and didn't even register the context. To her, I was invisible, incapable. Her prejudice was my greatest shield. The year leading up to the party was a blur of calculated moves. I hired a small, aggressive PR firm. I gave them a single explicit instruction. I wanted a media blitz, but I wanted it to be a slow burn, building to a massive explosion on a specific date, the date of Eleanor's birthday. Company would be profiled, but I, the mysterious CEO, would remain out of the spotlight. We would be the tech world's best-kept secret, until the moment I chose for us not to be. PR firm was brilliant. They started with trade publications, then moved to business journals. "The logistics disruptor you've never heard of," one headline read. "Aura Innovations, the silent force behind global commerce," read another. The name started to generate buzz. There was speculation about the reclusive founder, B. Rivera. Some thought it was a seasoned industry veteran operating under a pseudonym. No one suspected the truth. 2 months before the party, I made my biggest move. I orchestrated the acquisition of a smaller, publicly traded rival. It was a bold, almost reckless maneuver that required every ounce of capital and nerve I had. The negotiations were a brutal, round-the-clock affair. For 2 weeks, I barely slept, living on coffee and pure adrenaline. The night the deal closed, I sat alone in my dark office, looking out at the city lights, and I felt a profound sense of calm. This was the final, critical piece. This would make Aura Innovations a name that even the DeLucas couldn't ignore. The final step was personal. I commissioned a gown from a young, avant-garde designer. I wanted something that was both elegant and armor. It was a shimmering, deep emerald silk that seemed to drink the light. It was the color of money and envy. When I tried it on for the first time, I didn't see the girl who had trembled in Eleanor's foyer. I saw a queen. The day before the party, my PR firm executed the final phase of their plan. They released the news of the acquisition to the mainstream financial press. And for the first time, they released the full name and a professionally shot headshot of the founder and CEO of Aura Innovations, Bella Rivera. The story was explosive. Housewife to Titan: The Secret Life of Bella Rivera, CEO of Aura Innovations. The narrative was irresistible. A mysterious, self-made woman who had built a 9-figure tech empire from scratch, right under the noses of one of the country's most prominent families. My real name, my maiden name, was now attached to the legend. I spent that day in a hotel suite, my phone turned off, my laptop closed. I just sat in the silence, letting the reality of what I had done sink in. The first stone had been thrown. The ripples were spreading. Tomorrow night, at the party, the wave would crash. That evening, I finally returned to the DeLuca mansion. The house was buzzing with preparations for the banquet. Florists and caterers swarmed the halls. Eleonora was in her element, a general commanding her troops. She saw me slip in the side door and barely gave me a glance. "Bella, do be a dear and make sure the place cards are in alphabetical order. I can't be bothered with such trivialities." She turned away, shouting an order about the temperature of the champagne. She hadn't seen the news. Course she hadn't. Her world was a curated bubble of society pages and gossip columns, not the financial news. I walked to the grand dining room and picked up a place card. Mrs. Eleonora DeLuca. I ran my thumb over her name. Trivialities, I thought. She had no idea. She was orchestrating the decor for her own public execution. Curtain was about to rise on the greatest performance of her life, and she didn't even know she was the star of the tragedy. And as I stood there in the quiet opulence of her carefully constructed world, I felt no nerves, no fear. Only a vast, chilling patience. Patience of a predator that knows its prey is already in the trap. The night of the banquet arrived, cloaked in an atmosphere of opulent expectation. The grand hall of the De Luca estate had been transformed. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, casting a golden, forgiving light over the hundreds of guests. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful people making powerful conversation. I moved through the crowd, a ghost in my emerald gown. People's eyes slid past me, registering only Marco's wife, a familiar, unremarkable piece of the scenery. It was exactly as I had planned. Marco found me by the champagne fountain. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his eyes were weary. "There you are," he said, handing me a glass. "You look stunning, Bella." There was a note of surprise in his voice, as if he were seeing me for the first time. "Thank you," I said, my voice even. Eleonora made her grand entrance precisely at 8 o'clock. A hush fell over the room. She was wearing a gown of diamond-white silk, dripping in De Luca family jewels. She was radiant, regal, the undisputed queen of her court. She glided through the room, accepting adoration like oxygen, her smile a perfect, polished mask. This was the pinnacle of her existence, the moment all her planning and manipulation had been for. The validation of her legacy. I watched her, a predator studying its prey. I saw the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her glass, the way her eyes darted around the room, cataloging every important guest, ensuring her power was reflected back at her. This wasn't a celebration, it was a reaffirmation. Dinner was a masterpiece of culinary art, but I barely tasted it. My entire being was coiled, focused on the moment to come. The small talk at my table washed over me. I nodded, I smiled, I was a perfect porcelain doll. Inside, a storm was gathering. After dessert, Marco stood to give the first toast. He spoke of his mother's grace, her strength, her unwavering dedication to the family. It was a beautiful speech, full of love and admiration. The guests applauded warmly. Then Eleonora herself rose. Her glass held high, she surveyed the room, her kingdom. "Thank you, my darling Marco," she began, her voice resonating with practiced emotion. "To all of you, my dearest friends, my family, thank you for being here to celebrate this milestone. When I look around this room, I see more than just friends. I see a legacy of tradition, of strength, of knowing who we are and what we stand for. It is a legacy I am so proud to have built and one I am proud to pass on." She paused for effect, letting the weight of her words settle. This was her moment, the culmination of her life's work. And that's when I stood up. It was not a dramatic gesture. I simply rose from my chair. But the effect was like a stone dropping into a still pond. A few heads turned, then a few more. A confused murmur rippled through the hall. Marco looked at me, his expression a mixture of shock and panic. Eleonora froze, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. My emerald gown seemed to absorb the golden light, creating a magnetic pull. I lifted my own glass. My hand was perfectly steady. "I, too, would like to propose a toast," I said. My voice, quiet but clear, carried through the suddenly silent hall, amplified by the perfect acoustics she had been so proud of. Every eye was on me. "To family," I began, my gaze sweeping the room before landing squarely on Eleonora. "The kind of family that teaches us our most valuable lessons. The kind that shows us, through trial and fire, who we truly are." I let the words hang in the air. The confusion in the room was palpable. Continued, my voice calm, almost conversational. "A family that teaches you that your worth is not in your name, but in what you build. That your strength is not in your inheritance, but in your resilience. And that sometimes the greatest gift anyone can give you," I paused, holding Eleonora's terrified gaze, "is to completely and utterly underestimate you." Just as I said that last word, a low vibration filled the room. Then another. And another. The sound of dozens of phones, all buzzing with the same breaking news alert my PR team had just pushed out. Whispers erupted, spreading like wildfire. Heads bent down to illuminated screens. I saw faces, the face of Mr. Abernathy, his jaw agape in stunned realization. The face of the governor, who was now looking at me with a newfound, intense interest. The face of a well-known financial journalist at a corner table, his eyes wide as he connected the dots between the mysterious B. Rivera and the woman standing before him. The headlines were lighting up the room. Bella Rivera, De Luca daughter-in-law, revealed as CEO of Aura Innovations following $200 million acquisition. The secret tech mogul in high society's inner circle. I turned my attention back to Eleonora. Her face was a canvas of crumbling disbelief. The mask of serene power had shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. Her perfectly painted smile trembled, then collapsed. Her eyes, those once sharp, cutting instruments of judgment, were now wide with a dawning, helpless horror. She looked at Marco, but he was staring at me, his own face pale with shock and a complex emotion I couldn't yet decipher. Was it betrayal? Or was it awe? It was too late for any of it. Power in the room had shifted. It had tilted on its axis and rushed toward me, a tidal wave of influence and respect. The applause started with one person, the journalist, who began to clap slowly, purposefully. Then another joined, then a table, then the entire room rising to their feet. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roar. They weren't clapping for the De Luca legacy. They were clapping for me. For the story. For the sheer, audacious brilliance of the victory. I held my glass a little higher. To legacy, I said, my voice ringing out over the applause. The kind you build yourself. The guests roared their approval, lifting their glasses to me. And through the sea of standing admirers, I saw Eleonora. She was still standing, trapped in the spotlight, a relic in her own museum. The applause for me was a deafening indictment of her. Forced by the crushing weight of social propriety, she had no choice. Slowly, mechanically, she raised her hands and began to clap. Her claps were silent, pathetic, swallowed by the thunderous ovation for the woman she had tried to erase. She was powerless, outshined, and utterly, publicly defeated. Her legacy wasn't being celebrated. It was being rendered obsolete in real time right in front of her. The days that followed the banquet were a blur of headlines and frantic phone calls. The De Luca name, once a bastion of old-world power, was now a footnote in my story. I didn't take Marco's calls. I didn't need to. Our marriage had died long before that night. The party was merely its public funeral. He was a relic of a life I had surgically removed from my own. My true victory wasn't the look on Eleonora's face. It wasn't the gasps or the applause or the fawning media coverage. My victory was quiet. It was the feeling I had the next morning, walking into the bustling headquarters of Aura Innovations, a building I owned. I saw the vibrant, brilliant team I had assembled. I saw the real-time logistics maps on the screens, a testament to an idea born in a lonely guest room. I had built something real, something that solved problems and created value, something that had nothing to do with which fork to use or where your grandfather went to school. The revenge wasn't the moment Eleonora fell. It was the thousands of moments that led to my rise. It was every sleepless night, every coded email, every risk, every small secret win. The banquet wasn't the battle, it was a victory lap. Eleonora had tried to put me in a gilded cage, but she never understood that I wasn't a bird. I was an architect. And while she was busy polishing the bars of my prison, I was using them as the foundation for my castle. They wanted me to be a footnote in their history, so I wrote my own book and simply left them out of it. Her world was built on exclusion, on making others feel small to make herself feel big. My world was built on creation, on making something out of nothing. And in the end, what you create will always be more powerful than what you try to destroy. The best revenge isn't loud and flashy. It's the quiet, undeniable hum of your own success. It's building a life so full and brilliant that the people who hurt you become irrelevant, distant specks in your rearview mirror. If my story resonated with you, if you know what it's like to turn pain into power, share your own experiences in the comments below. I read every one. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served. 'Cause sometimes the best way to win the game is to build your own board.